Welcome to the podcast that rocks. This is our first episode. It's called Startups, Power, and Culture Between Mexico and the US. And our first guest is Rhett Alden Price. Hello, man. He's a Fulbright scholar specializing in international business, now living in Mexico City.
So, as Guillermo said, I'm a Fulbright scholar, currently doing the binational business Fulbright, working in transnational consulting, and taking some classes at LatAm. Before I worked in a variety of things. I was in the Army National Guard. I was working in some political affairs in Arizona, and I just completed my master's about a year ago. So I've been active, but it's great being in Mexico. Mexico City is one of the most amazing places I think I've ever visited in the world, world class in every category. But it's also interesting for the topics we're about to discuss. A lot of things going on, a lot happening in the background.
Welcome to Mexico again. And I'm so glad to have you here. I met Greg some time ago, right? And he's the kind of friend that we always go through like super relevant topics, even if we are out of context, right? We can talk about marketing, about politics, about startups, I don't know, about funding, about the differences between the US and Mexico. And me working in a company based in New York, I think I learned a lot about both cultures and how the business works across industries. So I have a background in fintech and banking, but also in e-commerce, and it's very exciting to see how the things move around. So that's why we are here today. Right, so let's get it started with the first question. This is the ecosystem reality check.
Okay.
So from your perspective, how different is the startup ecosystem in Mexico compared to the US? Not just in funding, but in mindset, risk tolerance, and decision making.
Yeah, I think there are some critical differences. So the startup ecosystem is interesting. I've read like a little bit of material on it, and I actually did a graduate consulting project on it. So I was in El Salvador about 2 years ago, year and a half to be exact, and we were actually helping the Ministry of Economy with some ideas for alternate investment vehicles for their startups and PMEs and incubators and those sorts of things. And it was pretty fascinating, but it gave me a lot of insight on how investment works in Latin America and how investment attitudes really work in Latin America. And it actually made me think of two books. I'm just going to do a cheap plug-in right here. One's called The Culture Map by Aaron Meyer, and another one's called Why Nations Fail, but it's really about development economics. It's by Asimoglu and Robinson, but it made me think about those because different nations, different cultures, they're like different systems, right? And there's different maybe economic norms or different norms within business. And I saw those realities firsthand. And being here in Mexico, I've seen that probably 1,000 times more working with cross-border business executives and talking about topics related to the upcoming trade agreement. But I would say the most critical differences probably is about the ecosystem, yeah, but it's also about attitude. So the investment appetite in Mexico, I'd say, is more conservative. I would say because, in general, people have less non-discretionary spending, a greater percentage of their check or their income goes toward essential living costs, right? Food, housing, schooling for their children. People are obviously going to be less prone to just invest. I think that's one factor. I think another factor that people often miss is that I think age is a big factor in the Mexican business environment, at least from what I've seen. I'm actually about to be 27, but doing consulting, I've talked to people and they've been like, wait, are you not 30? And it's actually surprised me. I think that is one of the biggest differences, I would say. And so for someone like a Mark Zuckerberg or a Bill Gates to come at such a young age is there are some obstacles, right? There are some challenges for that to happen. I would say one last thing I would add to is that there's also another element, right? When you do a startup, it's a huge risk. I want to say 80 to 90% fail depending on the sector or industry. And then like in some industries, it's up to like 95%, right? And so I actually want to, another anecdotal story here. I have a friend who recently did a media startup. It's growing, it's emerging. But
here in Mexico?
Yeah. It's making really good money, honestly. And they even have clients to the size of Warner Bros. And Uber. Anyway, he was working at Banco de Mexico. Lawyer, went to Tom. And he quit his job and he said his dad didn't talk to him for like 3 days, right? And I think that there's another element here, a very traditional path to success, which exists everywhere. But I think that the appetite for risk and the appetite for failure is maybe a little bit more adjusted in certain parts of the United States, especially like, the West or East Coast.
In America, they have Forbes publication that is the 30 under 30. And
Right.
that's a thing that is super normal in the US, right? The top 30 entrepreneurs that are under 30, right? And I think that is something that it's been seen here in Latin America as risky. Just risky because you're young, as you said, right?
Yeah. What do you know? Who do you know?
Exactly.
What value do you bring?
Exactly. Yeah, I think the value is different here in Mexico and Latin America in general, right? Okay, that's cool. So the next one is politics and business.
All right.
So how do you think these political cycles and government policies in the U.S. and Mexico actually can affect the way startups are on the ground? Like not in theory, but in operational decisions, because there's a lot of facts that we have been going through
Sure.
the past weeks. So I know you have learned a lot.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that it's really interesting. I think they directly do impact it. Traditionally, I would say 20 years ago, and probably for the rest of the modern American era, it would probably be a minimal impact, unless we're talking about maybe taxes in the startup, especially when they exit and they get capital gains. But in the modern era, it does affect it, right? I think, not to name maybe parties or administrations, but if you and me are doing a startup and I have a visa from another country, it's going to complicate the situation, right? If we have a change in immigration policy. I think another thing that complicates the matter is inflation and funding. I mean, if the economy has complications, people have a lower risk appetite, even in the United States, right? Maybe, it's higher in general, but with the decreased economic outlook, people are always less prone to risk their money. So I do think there is a direct effect. Now, I wouldn't even say, I think traditionally the attitude toward this would be, whether it's an ideological effect. And I would actually deny that. I think it's more about just the economy. Yeah. And maybe the minerals or materials supporting emerging technology and how that's handled. Yeah.
What are from that perspective, what are the biggest hidden challenges when doing business between Mexico and the U.S.? What do you think are those and the things that founders should consider and discover when they are going deep into this?
Right. Well, I think the biggest challenges in this case, I think there's actually challenges and advantages. So I would say there's certainly challenges interpersonally. I think it's no secret that there are different cultures and different norms within each culture. One thing that I've been to Mexico probably, I think, I don't even know, maybe 12 or 13 times. I can't even count how many times.
You're one of the Americans that knows the most of Mexico, ever in life. More Mexico than I already do. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've just been lucky to be born in Texas and have an interest in the country, but I still struggle with the indirectness versus the directness and the high contextual social cues. I think a lot of it in America, it's just a little bit more blunt. My family is especially blunt, and I did some military training, so I think that probably enhances that, right? But I would also say that in Mexico, I think that everything is very contextual, and I think that the office almost feels like a family. You're kind of expected to go out to eat with everyone if they're going out together, and there is more of a kind of delicate social dynamic at play, and you have to, be a part of a team, both, in terms of work production, but also socially. And I think that's very different. And I think that there are a lot of advantages with that, though, right? Because if we're trying to get investors, let's say you and me have a startup.
Yeah.
It's going to be great because you have your perspective and I have mine, and you can help me learn how to reach out to maybe Mexican angel investors or venture capital firms or other teams within our sector, and then I could also give that same perspective, right? But on the U.S. side, and so I think there's massive advantages, both interpersonally and also linguistically, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, linguistically, but also geographically, it's like a strategic location that we have.
Yeah.
Which I love. Yeah. So I've been CMO for 3-4 startup projects, and I launched around 60 projects in the US and Latin America. Every project is different, and they are constantly evolving. Now with AI, everything is about agent, automation, generative AI. But I would like to ask, from your perspective, what kind of industries do you think have more possibilities?
This is a great question. So I think there's two ways we can look at this. We can look at it in terms of kind of what technology is next, but we can also look at the USMCA, or TEMEC, in Spanish. A lot of my consulting actually covers the USMCA trade agreement, and there's so many aspects of it, right? From labor to mining to energy. I mean, it's pretty dense. But I think that what we're going to see, we've already seen this a little bit with here in Mexico, right? They have tariffs on Chinese, what they consider like critical imports, or maybe critical Chinese import and penetration. And so electric vehicles are one of those, right?
Sure.
Any kind of telecommunications or advanced technology, I would say a lot of those have had these extreme tariffs, 50% or more. And a lot of that is because that the U.S. is proposing a sort of regionalization, sort of an inter-American economy, inter-American manufacturing and supply chains. And that's been mentioned for quite a while now, but I think people are very serious about it now. It's not just a talking point at a conference. And I see this as a great opportunity for entrepreneurs in Mexico, for entrepreneurs in the United States, for engineers in both countries, because going back to maybe what technologies are going to emerge next, right? We have AI, which is all the buzz right now, but like the dot-com bubble, AI is going to go through its own phases and have to develop a little bit more. But I would bet my money on robotics. I think robotics are next. And we see like very, very powerful robotics companies coming from China. Unitree Robotics is one of them. They're about to IPO, and I think the IPO is going to be predicted about $7 billion. So for a company in the Chinese, the Shanghai stock market, very impressive, right? And I think with that, the U.S. is concerned about potential espionage or just market competition, and they're going to want the manufacture of domestic robotics, or maybe North American robotics, in between the U.S. and Mexico, and then to some degree Canada. And so what I see, kind of how we have like automotive industry in Mexico, right, where a lot of the manufacturing is done in Mexico, a lot of the components are made. And depending on every company is different, they're trying to work with different import or export restrictions, especially with the rules of origin within the trade agreement. They may complete that vehicle in Mexico or the United States or a different country. But in this case, I see, at the very least, robotics components being manufactured in Mexico and it being a huge commercial boom for both countries. Now, who knows? Is that going to be in 5 years, 10 years? But it will happen. I would bet quite a bit of money on that.
I think it's going to be faster than we think. I mean,
right.
I've heard a lot of investors, and mostly in America, and they get asked this question, and they all say that they are already investing in robotics. Like 95% is going to robotics, right? And thinking about Mexico, I mean, we are like perfectly located, like just beside the U.S., and we have connections with China, right? And we have all the manufacturing here, so like it's a perfect environment, you know.
Well, I think there's a lot of political will, not to speak maybe in favor or maybe even against specific political parties, but within currently the Trump administration and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, they're advocating for maybe higher wages and more unions in Mexico, because in their mind, that's a competitive advantage if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to decide where to develop your supply chain. If there are unions that are very functional, right, are very active on both sides, and there are higher wages, you actually have more competition in between manufacturing sites on both sides of the border. And so with that, you have a lot of unions in Mexico who seek to promote this as well during the trade talks, because it's honestly going to be very good for the Mexican working class as they get higher wages and they have the ability to work at these sites and access functional unions and modern unions. So I think there's that. I think another segment is, well, I mean, just look at, I think right now people are kind of skeptical of trade, international trade in general. There's been a lot of, just given the environment, giving maybe conflict internationally. But let's look at the numbers, okay?
Yeah.
So as of 2024, because I think those are the most accurate numbers, I think last year there was some dispute, but just to be accurate, right? About $840 billion between the U.S. and Mexico.
That's crazy.
U.S. imports from Mexico, if I'm not mistaken, are around $500 billion, and I think the Mexican imports are about $335 billion. And so I think there's a lot of potential for that to even grow more, right, as we become more intertwined, and as this strategy realizes itself, as a lot of offshoring that before was maybe in China or other markets nearby, Vietnam, come back to North America and are implemented in Mexico, or as new industries develop and they're implemented in Mexico. I think we're going to see a lot of this just accelerate. Yeah.
Even though there's some language barriers,
right?
With the U.S. is different. So What cultural misunderstandings do you think, or have you seen or experienced that can quietly kill deals between Mexico and the U.S.?
I think it may be just being too direct on the American side, of course.
Yeah.
And I think, conversely, I would say that on the Mexican side, I think if let's say you're a VC and I'm a founder, you got to communicate, right? Exactly. Like if you're saying Mexican VC, I'm an American founder. I think typically we found the opposite case, but in this case, right, I would need like very direct instructions in terms of what you seek for me to get more funding, right? What you want out of my product, how you want me to maybe perform in the market. It would be more direct and less contextual.
You know what happens in Mexico? So sorry to interrupt. I heard a
Go
lot
ahead.
of this in the startup environment and B2B business. It's like everything happens as if it was like a love relationship. Like we are dating. Like we have to go have a coffee first, and then you have to text me back, and then I will let like maybe 1 or 2 days, happen, and then we go dinner together again, and then we go to the movies, and it's like never ending. And you guys are just straightforward. Are we making business or not? And then are we going to outline and what is like the work frame and what is the next steps, right? And we are like, let me think, and maybe if we go out again, and then maybe I will like this or not. And this is the relation between the BCs and the startups.
Right. It's courting. It's like dating.
It's dating, yeah.
Yeah. I do think that's probably true. And I think that as we see, more Mexican startups take off, you'll see their work with maybe American founders. And, I could foresee maybe a situation where, American founders, not only they're already American and, have this cultural directness, I think you're also going to see they're obviously going to be successful in their field, and they're going to kind of be, I mean, you know how VCs act,
Yes.
right? And they're going to be very direct probably with these Mexican startups. And I think that it may be a culture shock, right? Because they may think, oh my God, like they're being so rude, they hate me. When it's really just, this guy is probably not, he's a little direct. And maybe sometimes, just knowing a few VCs, they have some difficult personalities sometimes. So could be kind of a situational thing.
Yeah, that's curious.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So the last year I was working with some private and public companies from Spain. There are some provinces, this is confidential, I will not tell, but there are some provinces that are interested in the startup environment in Mexico, right? So I would like to know, looking ahead from 5 to 10 years, if you see Mexico becoming a true startup powerhouse for the US or not, and why do you think it's becoming important for some markets in Europe?
Interesting question. I think that really it's altogether different. I think at least from what I've seen, given my experience in El Salvador and given a few people I've met with in the startup environment here and the consulting work I've done and just what I've seen, I feel like with a lot of American startups in general, I think including obviously Mexico in this, what I see within the United States, startups are very, competitive. And with probably it's a very saturated field. A lot of people want to do a startup, especially in the last 10, 15 years. It's become quite a common thing. With that, founders get more picky. Not founders, but VCs become more picky because they have a wider array of candidates, right, to fund. And as a consequence, I see at least a lot of bias toward maybe, did you go to an Ivy school? Did you go to Stanford?
Yeah, true.
Did you study computer science? And it makes me kind of think, right? Like if Steve Jobs was alive today in our generation, could he even get funding, right? It's kind of a bizarre circumstance. But with that, I think that Latin America, given those difficult environment, it has to position itself altogether differently. And Mexico obviously is included. Mexico has probably the deepest market outside of maybe Brazil. And so they have incredible potential. But I really think that most startups here are going to have to differentiate themselves, not only in terms of just their product and its features, but its usefulness in Latin America. One example of this is in El Salvador, I think it's an app called Hugo app.
Hugo, yeah.
And it got acquired. It was pretty decent valuation. And it was specifically designed for their ecosystem and their environment. And I think it has to be similar, right? Whether it's access in the informal market, the non-bank folks, or maybe if it's remittance type of software or technology, something that is local to Latin America that can get a fast amount of users. And I think network effect is also very important because of the communal and social nature of folks in Latin America, how close the community is and how close families are. The network effect is even more profound, right? Because, oh, I have that app. Well, I need to send this to you. Well, okay, just download this app, right?
Yeah, true.
And it's even more pronounced.
Yeah, just like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think that if Latin American startups can pivot maybe toward something that is unique to the region, I think they have a real shot at ballooning. I would say if they pursue maybe just in general like AI, like chatbots are kind of, there's already like so many giant chatbots, but there's a lot of different AI bots kind of forming right now, whether it's like image generation or whatever it may be. Likely, what I see is them getting acquired by an outside player, just because of the size of these markets. The funds here in Latin America are smaller, right?
Yeah.
Than like in Europe or East Asia or the United States, Australia. But I don't think they have like a huge startup environment either. I think that really it's about making the startup. Sure, you have technology. Maybe you want to do AI or whatever it may be, right? Blockchain. But what can you do that is uniquely conditioned or valuable to Latin America and Latin American consumers, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And I see a lot of American companies that are also heading into nearshoring. So they
Yes.
find really good resources, like, top tier, and they will find it for like half investment in Latin America, right? Or maybe like even less. Anyways, so for the very last part of the podcast, we will switch to Spanish because this is the beauty
Bueno.
of the podcast. And we have a 3 follow-ups super randomly, so I'm going to pick one of those. ¿Qué opinas del Silicon Valley? ¿Crees que sigue siendo este centro de gravedad o esta idea ya está como pasada de moda? ¿Crees que pues el Silicon Valley se quedó con ese nombre y tal vez ya no es esta concentración, ¿no?, de negocios que solía ser hace 10 años? ¿Qué opinas?
Pues yo creo que depende, ¿no? Del sector y de la tecnología. Hay muchas buenas startups en Nueva York, igual en China, que están como a nivel mundial. Pero si estamos hablando de... Bueno, es una cosa tener un startup, ¿no? Es otra cosa tener el próximo Facebook, el próximo ChatGPT.
Sí.
GPT. No, eso es una otra cosa tener el próximo Tesla, ¿no? O sea, yo creo que startups que podrían convertirse de este nivel solamente podrían venir como de Nueva York, Silicon Valley, China. Pero yo creo que en general para tener un exit como de 50 millones, como siquiera más, como 200 millones. Es posible no estar de este lugar, pero yo creo que también, hablando del network effect, no está tan fuerte en esos lugares porque tendrás acceso de los mejores ingenieros y tecnología y ideas y todo. Es diferente. Yo creo
y solo para que dimensionemos, en Latinoamérica hay un ecosistema de startups todavía bastante pequeño o en crecimiento. En Brasil hay más de 19,000 startups y en México hay cerca de 2,500, ¿no? Comparemos el tamaño de Brasil con el de México y lo atrás que está México en esto, ¿no? ¿Cuántos unicornios hay en México recientemente y cuál es la proporción versus mercados como Brasil, ¿no? La inversión en el último año de startups fue aproximadamente de 4 billones de dólares. Entonces, esto es un indicador, ¿no?, de cuántos unicornios nacen en Latinoamérica cada año versus cuántos pueden nacer en mercados como Estados Unidos, en algunos mercados europeos, en Asia. Entonces, creo que todavía hay un camino adelante, pero la ventaja o la bondad que hay entre esta relación que hay en México y Estados Unidos, pues es todo el hecho geográfico, el ecosistema, el nearshoring, y el poco gap o sesgo cultural que hay entre dos países, porque a pesar de ser culturas distintas, también tenemos muchas cosas en común. Yo quiero cerrar con esa reflexión. Gracias, Greg. No sé si quieres agregar algo más también para cerrar.
Pues no, creo que hemos dicho todo, ¿no? Pero gracias por tenerme aquí. Era un placer. Gracias.
Genial. Gracias, Greg. Y nos vemos en la próxima edición del podcast That Rocks con Guillermo. Y bueno, ya veremos quiénes son nuestros siguientes invitados.